is there are various terms and concepts with regard to what we typically call ourself. Normally, what we think of as ourselves is a combination of a physical appearance, which is a body, of course, and we know how that has changed from birth onwards. I recently met somebody who told me that he's getting younger all the time because when he was born, he had no teeth, and now also he has no teeth. And when he was born, he had no hair, and now he also has no hair. And when he was born, he couldn't walk, and even now he has to have a walking stick. So with all advancing years, he says he's getting younger. So we obviously know what it means to have a body. And even a baby, there's a point where a sense of self-consciousness comes in. And then the baby sees its own image, for example, in a reflection, a mirror or something. And as the self-consciousness grows, this identification with the physical also grows. But we know we're not just the physical, we know also that we have mental capacity. There is a certain mode of behavior that we call a personality. And so this combination, what we might call a psychophysical unit, carries on. And we assume that this is called I. And we philosophically, technically call this ignorance. So the whole goal of Vedanta is to remove this ignorance. And so remarkably, it is not like many religions, for example, which say our goal is heaven or our goal is going to God or anything like this. This is a wonderful starting position that is based on a duality that comes from this experience of individuality. And the sense of individuality, no doubt, has also a way of conceiving the highest, most perfect principle in our own individual way, since we are individually talented, we have individual skills, we'll naturally select a different concept of this highest perfection. Now, there's a great deal of confusion between terms. In Vedanta, we have the term Purusha, we have the term Atman, we have the term Jiva, and it's necessary to distinguish what these words mean. And so we can make reference, for example, to the Bhagavad Gita. There in the 15th chapter, and I often quote this, we say, Mamaivam so jivaloke jivabhutaha sanatanaha manaha sastani indriyani prakritishtani karsati. An eternal portion, says Krishna, representing the very divine principle, is an eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings, draws to itself the senses, with the mind as the sixth, which are in nature, prakriti. And we can say that technically then, ignorance is not understanding this principle. So let us analyze this statement. The body and mind is there, and this registration, identity registration, we call embodiment, a sense of embodiment. So the Lord says that in an eternal portion of myself, the first question, of course, for a philosopher is, how can the eternal aspect have any kinds of portions, any kinds of divisibility? So we have to see this in a context. So an eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings, draws to itself the senses with the mind as the sixth, which are in nature. Now, what we have just summarized as a body-mind really is the senses, the sense world, including one's own body, because the embodied soul, and we have a mind. We have 5 senses, and the 6th is the mind. And these are in nature. That means that we need to extrapolate what we have locally to the cosmological arrangement, the macrocosm. Is a fundamental principle. It's a generalization which is used in modern science also, where relativity is applied to the whole of existence. General relativity. So what is true of one thing must be true of the whole thing. That makes a lot of sense, because we now have an idea that everything is one. Energy is one, matter is one, therefore spirit also is one. When we talk about jiva, that is the soul, jivatman, then this is defined, an eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings, draws to itself the senses and the mind as the 6th. When the senses go and the mind goes, what remains? It is this eternal portion of myself entering into the embodiment. But the body has gone on death. So the term embodiment surely doesn't make any sense. But now we have to resort to another text, the Taittiriya Upanishad. It gives us a wonderful analysis, something like Russian dolls, that we, instead of considering one thing, one unit called myself, I now have to consider a number of different layers. And the technique of understanding the truth of who we are is to peel away these layers, one by one, one by one. On what basis? On the basis that a discerning person will soon find out which portions, which sections will be perishable. And we know that everything that has parts will also be perishable. So let's have a look at this. Let's take the human body. Human body is perishable. It's also changing. And the fact that we acknowledge that there is death means, okay, the body dies, it's perishable. Even when we look at it in the dignity poise in a coffin, we know that there's a kind of shell of a person, not the actual person is there. And it's a condition that all bodies have to face. Not just human bodies, but also plant bodies, also insect bodies, animal bodies. Any body of any kind that moves and has parts will have its birth, have its life, and also have its death. Now the curious thing is, we are reluctant to acknowledge that. We fight against it, kicking and screaming. We sit in a beautiful place, let us see Donegal with the sunshine and so on, and we think that this is going to last forever, most people. Now, we can hardly call this knowledge. We have to call it ignorance. So the ignorance of this fact is the ignorance that we're talking about, avidya. And once we know our origin, once we really know it, not just intellectually know it through philosophy and so on, but understand it fully, in other words, live in that area as it were, where this is the eternal portion, live in that eternality, this is called knowledge, real knowledge. If we are to distinguish it, there is lower knowledge and there's higher knowledge. There's aparavidya and paravidya. And the normal sort of knowledge that we have is of the lower kind. That is normally related to the senses and to the mind. But the higher knowledge transcends the senses, transcends the mind. So the first layer is made from food. In our guided meditation yesterday, I pointed out this fact that this body is made from a kind of miracle where some kind of organic material enters into this body and a transformation takes place. In fact, I think the thought of today mentions this fact in relation to muffins. And when I originally wrote this, it's because somebody regularly supplied, a devotee regularly supplied muffins, homemade muffins. And when Swami Purnananda was here, we thought it would be wonderful it would be charming to do some kind of thought on this, on the basis that we can pick up any theme we like, and examine it and trace it back to its origin. And remarkably, there are a number of multiple tracings we can use. We got to discover that the whole of the universe ultimately combined and cooperated to make this single muffin. It wasn't just the fact that there was wheat. Where does the wheat come from? Where does the sunshine that makes it grow come from? Where does all that come from? Where do all the chemical elements come from? We're tracing it back to stardust and giving a brief history. And then we have hydrogen and falling and what have you. But behind all that, behind everything that changes, is the unchanging. In fact, relativity tells us this, tells us that if you see something changing, it's changing in relation to a static observer, something that never changes. What is that thing that never changes? And when we get it, what will we get? We will get our freedom. It's not that something enters into us. It's not that we are looking for something, because that portion is already present in us. Kingdom of heaven is already within us. We have to peel off the various layers of the identification with the thing which is changing. Let's take the body then, food. The body is made from food. It's called Annamaya Kosha. Kosha means like a sheath, or a layer, or a level. You can imagine it like something like Russian dolls. Now, when the body dies, you've taken one layer off. What remains is called jiva, soul. It has energy, it has momentum. The momentum is a drive of unfulfilled desires and wishes moving us forward. And this movement forward is what we call an evolutionary movement, an unfolding toward perfection, otherwise termed by some kind of reincarnation. But you see, it is only this temporary thing, this thing that is changing, that reincarnates. The essential self doesn't come, doesn't go, is neither born nor does it die. It's unchanging, it's eternal, it is infinite. All of these terms relate to it. In fact, if we look at some of the descriptions of it, we can very clearly see how it is referred to variously, let us say, as Brahma Nirvana. Fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita will tell us something like this, give us a phrase. It will be called absolute freedom. It will be called peace. Sometimes it's called the supreme. Sometimes it's called wonder. Sometimes it's called the primeval person. Sometimes it's called the eternal goal. All these various terms are there to give us a clearer idea of what this highest ideal is. But anybody who is diligent can pick up many such expressive epithets from any number of texts, and in some places spoken of as that knowing which nothing further is to be known. So it is complete knowledge. Now, all the processes that are adopted by the seeker, and the session is seeker, question and answer. So all of us are on this journey, and all these processes that are adopted by us variously to suit us will result in mental purity. Mental purity means that realization through mental purity, removing all the complications and associations and attachments, firstly to the body, but secondly to the energetic body that sits in with us. That's the second layer, made from energy. Energy is essentially the whole universe. The whole universe not only runs on energy, but actually is in fact energy. Now the trick is we have to make the physicists acknowledge that this energy is divine energy. There's no other energy except divine energy. This was the one step that the ancient philosophers took. They also understood that this whole universe is made from energy, but that one step further, it is all divine energy. Now, if that is the case, what is the human body? Divine energy. In this sense, you cannot make a separation between body and soul. Of course, we can make some distinguishing thing that the body is made from food and other aspects of it may not necessarily be made from that. And so in that sense, we can make a distinction. But in terms of the overall picture, we have to say that the body and any other subsequent bodies, subtle as they are, the term is sukshma sharira, subtle body. What is left behind once the physical body is gone, that is sukshma sharira, or what we might call soul. In that sense, of course, there's a distinction between body and soul, yes. In another sense, however, a broader sense, we can see that body is actually nothing more than energy, since it's physical. And mind and everything else is nothing more than something that is also physical, but it's very subtle. But it is all this energy expressed, what we call, the yogis call prana. So the next level beyond energy will be the mind, and the next level beyond that will be the intellect. And now mind and all of that is really characterized as Vishwa, pertaining to this world, because it includes the senses, the subtle senses. When you close your eyes, the senses, inward senses, are still alive. And when you take all of that away, what are you left with? You're left with intellect. And the intellect is the nearest possible association with the life of what is behind it. And that is a luminous, a self-luminous entity. That entity we variously call all these names: absolute freedom, peace, supreme, wonder, primeval person, eternal goal, Atman, Purusha. These are various terms. Or self. The rest is called jiva. So the rest is called soul. And let us say that this Atman is called spirit. Now we seem to have three classifications. We seem to have body and materiality. We seem to have soul, which is a more subtle variation of it. And there is spirit. And spirit has no concept. Spirit has no mind in it. Spirit is absolutely pure. Spirit is accessible through the equilibrium of nature. So that when we go backwards, as it were, and peel off all the layers, we come to this buddhi, intellect. And then beyond this intellect, what will we find? We will find that there is this essential bliss, this harmony, which is nature itself. And beyond that is pure spirit, the eternal self. Now, all of these fleeting things, where do they come from? And are they separate from anything? Our highest conclusion is, no, it's all one and the same. It is that highest principle is both the material and efficient cause. These are philosophical terms. And what we mean by that is that it is a manifestation of that same thing. Now we have the example from the Upanishads of the spider weaving a web from itself. It doesn't require a Mrs. Spider to do it. It doesn't require a second thing. From its own essence, it is manifested. Through what? Through a web. Again, we are using the simile of spider. What is that web? The web is time and space and causation. Now, a spider and a web have two characteristics. If you poke a stick at the web, it just bounces because it is just material. It's, in a sense, it's inert. It requires its vibrancy from a living, moving thing, the spider itself. You poke a stick toward the spider, it will run. That's the sentient part. In that same way, the essential sentiency in us is pure being. It is pure existence, and it is pure consciousness, and it is pure bliss. This is how it is described. And then this world is just an echo of it, a manifestation of it, and provides us evidence of this pure being that doesn't change. That is why we want to live forever. That is why we feel we are alive, because our essence is pure being. That is why we are intelligent and have consciousness. That is why the spider moves when a stick is poked toward it, because it is a conscious entity, because its nature and our nature fundamentally is consciousness itself. And then what does he want? No being wants to be in an environment of pain or a condition of pain. We move away from pain. We all move towards something which is more pleasurable. Why? Because our nature is the highest purity of enlightened happiness, which we call bliss, the blissful state. This is called Brahma Nirvana. That is the state of absolute freedom. Now we can see it in our various stages of experiential consciousness, because we have these three states of consciousness, which is beautifully explained in many Upanishads, but the speciality Upanishad dedicated to the subject is the Mandukya Upanishad. It tells us that this waking state, this Vishwa, this is where all these bodies, the conscious body is assembled so that we say, I am this, I am that, I do this, I do that. I am a spiritual seeker and a spiritual aspirant. We are associated with this state of consciousness. But then when we peel the layers away unconsciously, that is, when the external consciousness closes off, like shutters closing off from a shop in the day. Okay, we've done our business, we now close the shutters. It is all internal. And that internal world is the internal world of the intellect. Cosmologically, we call this Hiranyagarbha, or God, the personal God that supplies us with subtle images. And then, of course, that descends, as it were, into a dreamless sleep where it has no objects, no diverse objects anyway, but just a sense of peace. And here, this is prajna, is equivalent to pure consciousness, but still with a sense of separation, so we call it peace. Now, from a waking point of view, we call it deep sleep. From a theological, philosophical point of view, we call it sleeping in the divine essence, sleeping in the divine lap, sleeping, resting in the divine, resting in our own divinity. And then there's an observation entity, pure spirit, from which all these varieties come. Because we reincarnate, as it were, from this state of deep sleep back to a waking state. And so the cycle continues until we are fully awakened. And awakened doesn't mean going into a waking state. Awakened means devoid, stripped off of all this ignorance, that is, this false identification with this false identification. And the false identification is the cause of all sorrow and misery. A penetrating analysis of it will show that this attachment, as it were, to this ignorant state and its objective manifestations is the cause of all our misery. And so, in this sense, we'll see in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, yoga, that is what is described as a union, assuming a separation in a dual system, is actually described technically as viyoga, that is separation from wrong thinking. Separation from wrong thinking, since this internal self, this pure spirit, is actually all pervading and ever present in everyone's heart. And the heart really is philosophical speak, or oriental speak, if you will, for this intellect. No effort is made to bring it in. No effort is needed to bring it in. And there's also, of course, this direct statement from the 15th chapter that we said. So, philosophically speaking, ignorance consists in the failure to grasp this vital truth. Ignorance covers up the truth, covers it up with various layers, and our perception through these layers. I'll give you another example. And I've used this example before. Supposing I go into a room and I see a green light, let us say, and I say what a wonderful green light this is to somebody who's familiar with it, somebody who lives in the room. Now, unbeknown to me, the light was originally white light. And white light, all light is originally white light, just, manifested at various wavelengths. And various wavelengths, we have a receptor that catches the wavelength. Blue is a short wavelength. So the red is a very long wavelength. It's the other end of the spectrum. When we talk about redshift, for example, a discovery by Hubble to say, oh, things are moving away from us because the wavelength has gotten longer. As it moves out, it stretches the light. And so we make a correlation between this distance and the velocity, very redshift, a kind of Doppler effect, which we know happens in sound. We know that when a fire engine passes us, then a ding, 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 and it goes off, it trails off with distance. So because the sound waves have gotten longer, stretched out, because it is stretched out in relation to us. Same thing when we see something stretched out, the light stretched out, it's in relation to us, the observer. And so we see this green light, unbeknown to us, the owner has covered this white light with a number of different colored plastic coverings, let us say. And so the last of these coverings was a green, and green is quite dense, so we think that the whole room is bathed with green. And then the person who owns this, with a little twinkle in the eye, will say, well, wait, actually I put a green covering on it. Let us take that off. And when we take it off, we may find there's an orange covering. We can take that also off. Like that, we can take all these different colors until we come to this one white light. In this same way, the Taittiriya Upanishad tells us that there are these various layers and levels, and we can take off one by one, actually. In our meditation also we can do it. Take off one by one until we discover, that's you. On the basis that anything that has a criteria, namely that of change, namely that of instability, namely that of something that has parts, these criteria. And then we see this diversity of things, and when we take that layer off, less diversity, but even still there is diversity. Let's take the mind itself. So much diversity is there, and so many different functions are there. There is the deep unconscious mind. Most of our activity is in the unconscious habitual level, like that. We call it sometimes instinct. A fly lands on my nose, instinctively my hand goes to remove it. This is all built by learned experience until it settles in a habit level and it becomes instinctual to us. But there's a vast area containing these internal organs, these internal senses. Memory is stored there. There are many things. Most of this, what we call mind, is in this category. But then there is something else. There is something more subtle and more commanding That is what we call intellect. Technically, you call this buddhi. Now, on a cosmic level, cosmological level, we call this Mahat, the great one, the great being. And this great mind, some people say, what is God? Well, God is a cosmic mind, the mind of God, the mind of something. Again, the analogy is like this. We are a person with a body and so on. Is there a cosmological version like this? Yes, the whole universe is seen to be like this. The Purusha Suktam is a beautiful, beautiful description of this, the Rig Veda. So this is a cosmological body. Now, when we apply a little imagination, we can see the dramatic beauty of it. When we look at the daylight sky with the short wavelengths, the blue sky, we can see, oh, this is Krishna's skin or the divine skin. And then at night we can say, oh, it goes dark. We can say, oh, this is the Mother Kali, whose distinguishing factor will be Kali, that is dark, dark. So we can see the dark skin. We can use our poetic imagination to think when we see these stars sparkling as they are, then we can see these are pearls around the Divine Mother's neck, something like that. It requires something of a poetic kind of imagination, an artistic's imagination, an artist's imagination. This application of imagination or image making is extremely useful in clarifying and purifying the mind. And it is this imagination that is encouraged through art in all religions, so that to the devotee we can clearly construct a picture, as it were, of our ideal that suits ourselves, one principle of the chosen ideal. And so, you see, ignorance covers up the truth. That's really what it is. It's not that it has to be specifically removed by extreme effort. It's a little easier than that. No doubt some effort is made to understand the truth. This effort is called discernment, viveka. We distinguish between what is fleeting, what is changing. Buddha, the Lord Buddha, Siddhartha, Gautama Siddhartha beautifully describes this understanding that all of this is in a state of flux. There's no permanence for it. It's like a kind of wave system that never stands still. If it stood still, we wouldn't be able to recognize life. We recognize life in contrast to that which does not change. So people become deluded because the truth is being covered by these various layers and the interpretations that go with it, and the associations that go with it, and the assumption that whatever layer is there, and accumulated combined layer, which we call the human person, all of this really is a covering up of the truth that lies within us. And when this ignorance is removed by its opposite, knowledge, then the Supreme reveals itself. It's a self-revealing thing. There's some example of that. Yes, the sun shines, but we often cannot see its full glory because clouds are in the way. When the clouds move on, then the sun reveals itself. So the Supreme reveals itself like that, just like sun when the clouds are removed, moved on by the wind. The self can never be literally lost. It can never be absent. It is always there. We cannot say, oh, when will you come to me? When will you reveal yourself? We can only make some effort at purity of mind, equivalent to moving the cloud on. So for the efficient functioning of society, there must be a number of classes of people in our society, and this is part and parcel of it, and so on. But the identification with the actionless self makes all activities lose their binding power. And that's where we get our freedom. So we find in the Upanishads, the ancient royal sages like Janaka, they knew this. They knew that they didn't have to stop activities. Their thoughts and deeds automatically did one important thing. It promoted the welfare of the world. It wasn't that they sat down somewhere and meditated to remove these various layers and levels. No, they used what they had. They used their skills, their talents, what we generally call capacity to work, and in this way, they purified the mind and purified the mind to the extent that the self was revealed. And not only that, but on the other side of things, they became useful in this world. So they lived for the welfare of the world. They saw what we might call, a little confusingly perhaps, inaction in such actions that they did. They saw this permanent truth of this eternal self amidst all these actions, these variations that are being used. And the same internal situation is brought by offering all actions and their results to the indwelling Lord of all. You take each and every action and dedicate them nicely. And such people, they can be, and I hope you're among them, they can be liberated while they're still alive. This ignorance can be blown away. Even, you see, according to this idea, even the worst of sinners can approach such persons and serve them. And even by virtue of that service, they can get liberation. They can discuss their problems freely, then acquire knowledge from such people. And this knowledge will burn up their ignorance. There are no exceptions. We cannot say anybody is irreconcilably doomed. Everybody has potential access to this knowledge. And when this heart, as it were, is purified, they realize their individual self. In what way? As the self of all beings. As the self of all beings. Don't think that it is individual spirit. It is, when discovered, it is found to be the self of all beings, not just human beings, but anything that moves, anything that has a pulse, anything that is a wave system. And so their actions will not taint them, people who discover that. Just like a lotus leaf, you see, you use the lotus leaf and the lotus flower as something that doesn't get wet. It doesn't get tainted by the water. So we have to mentally renounce all actions. We have to mentally renounce all actions. So the embodied one, the self-controlled, that rests happily in the body. And as we know from the Kathopanishad, also from the Bhagavad Gita, that this resting happily in the body is like this emperor or empress residing and resting in a 9-gated city or 11-gated city. The Kathopanishad tells us 11-gated city, and 9-gated city is there in the Bhagavad Gita. In resting, it doesn't act. It doesn't cause anybody or anything else to act. And so people who have access to this kind of knowledge, what we might call sages, liberated people, they really will look with an equal eye on a wise and humble person, on an animal, and even on the lowest of lowest in society, even what we might call people of dubious moral character. When this then creates an equilibrium, a social equilibrium. Much of this world's difficulties because we see these social differences, and then we see these racial differences, then we see these ethnic differences, then we see these linguistic differences. and everybody would love everybody else to be like us. But when we see this divine self in all beings, then we have now the formula for world peace. And so when disciplines are suitably adjusted, the same sightedness can be attained when, not in a post-mortem condition, but here, in this very life. We don't have to wait for this body to go off. And that, in fact, should be all our aim. We are aiming and should aim at such perfection. With this confidence, we know that when we take a devotional attitude, we can see that the Lord is the friend of all beings. And that Lord responds fittingly to the ways in which anybody individually approaches Him. And when we say Him, we're not applying a specific gender, it's just a convenience term. But not everyone is inclined to be good and noble. We have to acknowledge that. So we have to ask this question also: what happens if at some time virtue declines? We've gotten to a certain level and then virtue declines and vice rises to dangerous proportions in this world. Because many people are concerned about ongoing wars, many are concerned about, ongoing social difficulties or national difficulties in their view, because history tells us that they're only there on a stage and come and go to be replaced by some other scenario. So when that happens to a peak, to dangerous proportions, then what happens? You have a cosmic balancing power comes. You can call it CBP, a cosmic balancing power, and that comes and takes appropriate action. Assuming a body of pure sattva, the Lord Himself comes among mortals and reestablishes a harmony, a certain righteousness. A Buddha comes, a Jesus comes. And we might say that in this day and age, maybe we can say Ram Krishna comes. The devotees of Ram Krishna will acknowledge it. Those who don't acknowledge it, that's okay. But this cosmic balancing power comes and makes an adjustment. And in his own unique manner he protects those who are virtuous. He eliminates those that are not virtuous. And of course, such a descent we call avatara or incarnation. If we can take refuge in that, particularly in this day and age where there's a need to mobilize the heart, knowing the full significance of this divine birth and actions, this person is liberated in life also and abides in Him. So we have that option, normally called the path of the devotee, where we take this embodied cosmic balancing power and dedicate our life toward that. Christians do it in terms of Christ. Buddhists do it in terms of Buddha, although they may not acknowledge it quite in that same way. And devotees of Vishnu will use that toward Krishna or Ramakrishna. And then in this age, some may take this Ramakrishna. After all, devotees of Ramakrishna will say that this is the prophet, as it were, the incarnation of the new age. But supposing we don't acknowledge that, that's okay. We can still continue. It is all divine grace that reveals these things. So there's a life of a devotee. There's a life of a worker with both these same aims, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and a combination of the two. All serve to purify and clarify the mind so that we can remove this ignorance, this misunderstanding of our real nature, who we are. And then the jnana yogis will do that through a very direct route, and yet one which is very difficult because it requires keen intellect and dedication. So whatever route you take, it's okay. Whichever route you take is to remove these levels and layers of ignorance. Ignorance not coming as one single cloud, but as a multi-level layered aspect. And we call that collective aspect in us I, me, and so on. Misunderstanding the real I sits there unconditioned, not moving, just residing, beaming its divinity and mobilizing everything, like the spider with its web. So I hope that clarifies many things in relation to body, in relation to the assumed separation of body, assumed separation of body and mind, assumed separation of body and soul, assumed separation of body, soul, and spirit. And so we can use many different terms for these things. But the fundamental thing is your fundamental nature is pure, unadulterated, pristine spirit. That is your nature. Any deviation from that we call ignorance. So I hope I answered that question. Well, we have 5 minutes to go. So any other question that arises from that or separate from that is fine.
Swami, I suppose something around the tendency to run away from that. The way everybody succumbs to such busyness and doing. Is it the fear that is overwhelming, or?
When we are busy being busy, either mentally or physically or both, without the remembrance of this divinity or spirit, we're really laboring under this habitual misunderstanding of an identification of body-mind complex. And so we have to apply steadily an approach which sees God in everything, sees that spirit in everything, normally using the full capacity of your imagination to do it, and feel the presence of the divinity, so that we see that in others with eyes open in a normal waking situation, but we see it in ourselves during meditation. And this combination, both are necessary, this inward looking aspect and the outward looking aspect, with this reevaluation that God is not only in everything, but expressed through everything and as everything, and also the beyond as well. This is something we have to cultivate. We know it intrinsically. We know that we exist. Intrinsically, we know. We use this application I. So we know that there is an I that doesn't come and doesn't go. That we know, instinctively we know it. But our knowledge is so hidden, so deep down, that we assume that the layers are this fundamental identity, and they are not. And yet, of course, they are manifested from it. We have to look at things from not only a dualistic point of view, that's a good way, but also we have to understand that there is also a quasi-dualistic aspect to it. This is, and we have to see that there is a non-dualist aspect to it. And Vedanta teaches that all of these 3 points of view are valid points of view. And once we know it, then we can, in any given circumstances, shift our perspective. So the goal is, or the art is learning to shift these aspects, like shifting a manual gear in a manual car. And having a toolbox suitable to deal with many different kinds of situations. The ultimate multi-purpose tool being Advaita, non-dualism. It covers everything. But it has to be a practical non-dualism, an experiential non-dualism, cultivated in the silent moments of meditation, and a revaluation in the things that we see in the so-called outer world, including our own body and our own minds. You see the thought from yesterday, 2 golden rules there are, I think it was yesterday maybe, or maybe the day before, the 2 golden rules before us. I'll bring that poem up, if I can find it nicely. So, yes, and read it out. If somebody finds it before me, that's good. So let us see. Oh, okay, it was the day before yesterday, I think. Yeah. Oh, maybe the day before that, who knows. And now I can't find it at all. Okay. Maybe somebody else can find it. Anyway, I put it like this. There are 2 golden rules that we have to follow. And the one golden rule will be not to refer to the mind as my mind. You see the questioner that said, my body. See, immediately I heard that, I winced a little bit because I'm not used to saying my body. And so it's not my body. 2 precious golden rules obey. It is my mind. Don't ever say. It belongs to him. Now do assert. And to his sitting room revert. So clean and decorate with flowers in silent meditation hours. The second rule you must observe. Your view of body please reserve. I am eating and bathing, never say, for body is temple for his stay. So in cleaning his temple facilities, have no concern for sick disease. O Lord, when I forget your presence in your temple of body and throne room of mind, I forget that I am not the owner or agent, and therefore lose faith. Grant that my faith in thee may never waver. Sometimes it is good to reflect on these, what they are is really reflections, these thoughts and prayers, and try to see things as I see them. So leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thanks, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.